Hi everyone, this is the second to last set of slides for the semester for this course. Um, I did delete some of the slides that Dr. Starling had in here because I want in terms of the amount of information to cover before you guys take the final, I wanted to make sure that I covered information that I felt was important and information that I'm planning on covering on the final. So as I go through this, if you notice that the slides that are up on Blackboard are slightly different, that's why. Um, I'm going to try to go through these relatively quickly. So let's go. Um, this is the second to last time you'll look at these smiling faces on the slide. I know I pointed out every single time that I've done one of these lectures, but I don't know. When you're sitting here in a room by yourself recording a lecture, um, at least I won't be as punchy today because it's actually 3 o'clock in the afternoon while I'm recording these and not like 11 o'clock at night. So maybe I'll be less crazy for you guys. I don't know. Maybe you like the crazy. I have no idea. So anyway, let's get started. So as far as individuals in, I don't know why, but there's something about that picture that freaks me out a little bit. She really likes playing the guitar and staring intently at whoever is watching. So when we get to late adulthood, individuals start to find activities that really help them, what help them in a way that they are finding value and help them find ways to make themselves feel better as they're losing energy as they age. So they select valued activities to optimize returns from diminishing energy. So for this lady here, she's playing the guitar, and that's the activity that she finds valuable, and it probably helps her feel alive and still have something to produce for the world. People also find that in late adulthood, they might have to find new ways to make up for losses that they have cognitively. As we age, there are many cognitive changes that occur, as I discussed a little bit in physical changes. So, throughout this period, people want to try to figure out ways to make up for those losses. So, we're going to talk a little bit about memory. So, as far as deliberate memory is concerned, and episodic memory and remembering new things, as my 5-year-old son would say, forming rememberies, um, there are some more episodic memory errors than there were in past periods of life. People tend to take in less information in late adulthood, and not only are they taking in less information, but they're taking it in more slowly than they had previously. They might even have a hard time placing that memory in context, figuring out where that episode of memory occurred, and also they might find that it's a little bit more difficult to remember the source of the information. Sometimes when we get even to the later stages of late adulthood, if you have somebody who maybe has some memory issues or dementia issues or anything like that, they might actually state information and give you episodic memory, like memories, things that have happened in their life that are inaccurate or they provided in the wrong context. Like this thing happened, but it didn't actually happen where they're saying. Um, and there's a lot of issues remembering why you're doing things. Like this really interesting brain here is saying, "Why did you come into this room?" And he's like, "I don't know, bruh." I can't believe I just said that in an actual lecture. But those are some of the things that we see with episodic memory. As always in life, recognition is typically greater than recall. However, as we get older, recognition is most definitely the stronger part of memory when you're trying to recall something or remember something. We also see that there's a difference between implicit and explicit memory. So, implicit memory is the memory for knowledge and learned things, our abilities to do certain things. Implicit memory is often the type of memory where we don't 100% know where we learned it, like when exactly we learned how to tie our shoes or how we know how to tie our shoes, we just do it. Whereas explicit memories are declarative memory, our memory for being able to state things that have happened to us. So we see that implicit memory is stronger, and that the more familiar situations are, the easier we are able to recall. I'm not sure what Dr. Starling meant by AR here. I'm just going to ignore that and move on. As far as associative memory is concerned, we see that there's a decline in creating or retrieving links between pieces of information. Sometimes people forget things like putting a name with a face, would be an example of associative memory. knowing how to pair two things together or two events together, this sometimes becomes more weak and there's a decline. Um, Having specific cues, especially things like visual cues or being told something by somebody that's a cue, helps. But if the person's just trying at times to like form that association, it doesn't always work. So, for example, if an elderly individual is walking through the grocery store and somebody comes up to them and says, "Hey, how are you doing?" And there's no other cues, and this somebody they've only met a handful of times, they might have a hard time remembering who that person is and where they met them. We do see that remote memory actually is better in some ways as we age. People have something called a reminiscence bump um, when they are getting older, where they're able to remember things that happened when they were much younger. So we see that people, as they age, that they're much more able to look at memories from their past and remember these things. And this is actually a time in life where, as individuals get closer to death, they might actually tend to reminisce more and tell people about their histories and stories. I know, for an example, my great aunt Laura is in her 90s, her late 90s. And when you go and visit her, she tells you all these stories about her childhood and about how my grandfather met my grandmother. And it's just really cool because these are things like she didn't talk about as much in the past, but now that she's getting older, she really likes to share that information. And as a reminder, people as they age um, may want to do that whole process of passing the torch if they hit that generativity stage. And she's a great example of that because she really wants to pass on the information about our culture and our family that she's known for her life. Perspective memory is the ability to engage in planned actions. This is also a little bit weaker as we get older. Um, we are much better at remembering events, and so if somebody says, um, if so, remembering, oh, I have to go to the library next week, then remembering something like, oh, I have an appointment at 12 o'clock. So remembering the actual event is easier than remembering the time. Um, it's much better if people have reminders to do things, like things written down, than they used to. It's a lot harder to hold those things in your memory, like appointments and things like that you have to take care of without writing them down as we age. um, I think that this is probably a little bit better for most people if they have technology involved in their life because of things like calendars on phones and stuff like that helps with reminders. But generally speaking, this does get weaker as we age. So those are the things with memory that happen in middle adulthood. So the one thing I'll say about this is it really depends upon the person and where they're at as they're aging. You can meet somebody who is 95 and has like an amazing memory in all of these areas and they're not weakened at all. Or you can meet somebody who's in their 60s and is struggling with everyday things as far as memory is concerned. So it really is, a product of what their functional age is in terms of memory. So now to talk about language processing, there were a few things I took out here, like a slide with tip of the tongue stuff, which I think was an interactive activity for you guys to do in class. Since you're not in class, I removed that. I just figured it was too hard to translate through this. So language processing. Language and cognition are obviously highly correlated. You guys have learned about that through the course of the semester. We don't see a lot of change in understanding language or comprehension of language. So our receptive language changes very little. However, our language production does change a little bit. We have a harder time with retrieval involving our memory and speech planning. So things happen more frequently for those who are elderly, like the tip of the tongue state, which basically involves knowing that you know something, a piece of information, but you can't get that word out or that person's name out or something like that. It's stuck there. It's right there and you just can't get it out. I actually had this happen to me last night, so I don't know what that says about me. I mean, this happens to everybody, but it happens more frequently as we age. So I was trying to remember a word while I was recording a lecture for my cognition class, and I just couldn't get the word out no matter what I did. I actually paused my recording of the lecture and sat there and tried to think of it. I was like, I think it begins with an E. It's right there, and I just couldn't get it. And I still this morning or this afternoon do not remember it. But I'm sure you've all experienced tip of the tongue. So just imagine having that happen more as you get older. We start to use some compensatory techniques to help us with language production. We tend to speak more slowly so that we can process what's coming out of our mouths better. We speak more slowly so that we can hear the words we're saying and think about them more clearly so we know which words to use next. The verbosity of our language changes as we get older too, meaning that instead of trying to, I just sounded ridiculous using the word verbosity, but trying to use bigger words, sounding more intelligent, those sorts of things as we're speaking. As we age, we tend to just like keep it straight and to the point, use shorter words, just represent the gist of the situation, give the necessary information, but don't give tons of details. So in that way, it's helping with us with our processing, it's helping with our production, it's causing it to be a little bit more easy and quicker moving than it would be if we tried to use language in late adulthood that we currently use in our young adulthood. And yes, I'm still in my young adulthood for another like few years. So for problem solving and wisdom, as we see in late adulthood, people are better at solving real and hypothetical problems. We use a lot of life experience to solve those problems. We have a lot of real problems that come into play in late adulthood, like navigating family relationships, managing activities of daily living, which can become more difficult, and figuring out adaptive strategies when we are struggling. People might also start to plan ahead in late adulthood if they're starting to see that they're going to have difficulties in any of these areas. They're going to start looking at these hypothetical problems and trying to figure out ways to solve them. So to talk a little bit about wisdom, we have some very wise people here. We have Obi-Wan Kenobi today. Obi-Wan Kenobi on this slide and Gandalf, who are two of my favorite characters in any movie series or literary series ever. We're huge Star Wars fans in my house. But how would you define wisdom? Now, typically I would do a discussion board for this and have you guys tell me what you think about wisdom and what makes a wise person. But being that it's the last week of the semester and like you guys are probably going crazy trying to finish things and study for tests, I'm going to forgo any more discussion boards and just say, think about it on your own and how you would define wisdom. So the definition that we usually use is that it's the breadth and depth of practical knowledge, and it's our ability to reflect on past situations and apply that knowledge to new situations. So we're able to, look at the things the places we've been, the things we've gone through, look at the knowledge that we hold, and use that effectively in many different situations. So that's the definition of wisdom. People who are generally assumed to be wise have overcome adversity, which means they've had a lot of different obstacles in their life and they've figured out good ways to handle them. Sometimes we see people in leadership roles, we consider them as wise, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Gandalf. They both were in leadership roles. So you could say that they, were wise individuals or are wise individuals, like they're actually real people. Tend to have higher levels of education and tend to have better health. And age really isn't a guarantee of whether somebody's wise or not. And there's a stereotype thinking that the older you are, the wiser you are, but that's not necessarily true. I'm not really sure why there's this picture of Charlie Sheen on this slide, but I'm assuming that he's just winning and he thinks he's wise because he's winning, but I'm not quite sure if that's what Dr. Starling was getting at. But there's a lovely picture of Charlie Sheen smoking a disgusting cigar. So as far as cognitive change is concerned, we're almost done, guys, with middle adulthood. I mean, not late adulthood. Hope I'm not going too fast for everybody. I mean, the good thing about this is that you can always stop and listen to it again. Being mentally active is important. We see that people as they age are better if they have better education and better health, of course. Some interesting things that we found as far as having an active life. People who are bilingual tend to have better outcomes when it comes to dementia. Individuals who are bilingual develop dementia 4.5 years later on average than those individuals who are not bilingual in this one study by Aladi. So that's something that's beneficial. But along with that, if you look at it, being bilingual and using multiple languages keeps us cognitively sharp if we're doing this regularly. So really, the big thing that you need to remember to stay mentally healthy is to stay cognitively sharp and make sure you're doing lots of good mental activities, making sure you're doing stimulating leisure pursuits. Here's a thing about digital photography being better for elderly brains than crosswords. So I know crossword puzzles are very good for keeping yourself mentally sharp, but I'm assuming that this article looked at the fact that when you're taking photos, you have to use an element of creativity and figuring out how to take the best pictures and things like that, which might um, help keep a brain active. Also, continuing participation in the community is huge. Not withdrawing, not disconnecting, making sure you're still talking to family members, making sure you're still going out with friends. They have a lot of different things that seniors can do in the community, like clubs and things like that, to help them remain as participants in society. And we do see that the more activity a person has as they age, the better the quality life they have, and also the better they feel and the better mood that they have. So, quality of life is positively correlated with active participation in the elderly. And I mean, look at these happy people down at the bottom of the slide because they're participating in their bingo games. And lastly, as far as distance to death is concerned, we do see that as people age, their scores on cognitive tests show larger fluctuations. Sometimes it's more decline. Sometimes we see that those scores on cognitive tests are variable depending on different things that are going on in their lives. I'm not sure how much Dr. Starling talked about cognitive tasks in other and I know she talked about cognitive development, but like things like IQ tests and things like that. That we do see that between subtests, tests on IQ, the separate little tests that you give on an IQ test, when you give those to the elderly, sometimes they might do better on a memory test than they do on other times. So there's a lot of fluctuation. Whereas in younger people, we see that intelligence is pretty crystallized, which means it stays the same to put between testing. So somebody could take a IQ test one day that's in young adulthood, and then take it again 3 weeks from then, and their scores would be exactly the same to within a few points, to like 2 years from then, and their scores would be exactly the same. Or a couple months, whereas an individual that's older, you would see it fluctuate more. So you give them a test one day and they would do one way, and then a couple days from then they would do differently, and so on and so forth. And the last thing, which is very uplifting, is the idea of terminal decline, which is as people are getting closer to their death, we see that there is more cognitive change, and this occurs more quickly and rapidly as they enter their last periods of life. So, um, one of the worst things to talk about in this class is people dying, and it's not my favorite thing, but we'll get through it together. So that's the end of the cognitive development in late adulthood section. So one more slideshow, guys, and hopefully you found this helpful. I will be, I don't know. I will talk to you again soon. So weird ending these when you're talking to yourself in a room. Thanks.